Thank you, Arslan, for a great presentation and for taking us through the topic in detail on one hand and in a very timely and crisp and clear fashion on the other. Thank you very much. And I'm sure a lot of you can relate a lot more to the picture that we saw before, just before the presentation of Arslan. I would now like to request Mr. Feroz Rizvi for discussing his views on the practical aspects of the matter. Feroz Rizvi Saab has a vast experience of working in the industry, and prior to joining the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Pakistan, he has been part of a senior management of ICAP Pakistan Limited for many years. Feroz Saab, please, if you can come on stage.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen and distinguished guests, when I saw that picture of the man jumping into the sea, I was trying to figure out whether it was the auditor, the CFO, the chairman of the audit committee, or all of them. So that is something that we will have to figure out. But when I was told by Farooq Rahman that I was supposed to speak to you on this new audit report and requirement, I actually missed a couple of heartbeats and had to endure a bit of anguish and headache at the very thought of addressing such a unique and a distinguished gathering of chief executives, CEOs, CFOs, and chairman of the audit committee. Actually, I have never felt the poverty of my intellectual prowess as acutely as I have done now. But I'll try and see what I can do. So rather than suffering in agony, I thought, let me relate a little incident that happened, because I've had some experience of working in boards and audit committees. So I was in a particular audit committee, and the CFO announced that he was bringing the auditors for discussion, and the chairman simply inquired who was coming. And he said, well, it's our reporting partner. And the chairman said, oh, but what does he report? He doesn't report anything, he simply signs the audit report. And as the anchor said, that report over the last 3 years, actually not only 3 years, but hundreds of years, has probably never changed, except obviously for the dates. That was a revelation to me when Arslan mentioned that the true and fair view actually started in 1940 and still been going there. And actually, if you were asked my opinion, true and fair view you can only get as a consequence of leaving the bathroom door open. So basically, this of course about the incident was a bit of an exaggeration, and I can assure you that any resemblance to any person dead or alive would be purely coincidental. So whether in the past the audit reports were insipid or dull or boring, that now you would obviously have known that there's going to be a very, very significant change, a very profound change. And we, the auditors, the companies, the board, the audit committees, have to be prepared for it. Now, since I qualified, and that obviously looking at me, you would have guessed that that incident probably happened decades ago, auditors or accountants have been coming up with accounting standards like dozens. So what's the difference here? What's the big deal? But the reason, of course, is that up until now, all standards and other professional pronouncements were, to a very large extent, meant for accountants. And they were, to a large extent, obviously not of any great interest to other stakeholders. But this is a very profound change, and I'm sure that a very large number of stakeholders, analysts, other interested readers would read the audit report like never before. So basically, until now, I think, and you probably, all the CFOs would probably know, that auditors have expressed their concerns primarily through what is known as the management letter. And that management letter was discussed at the audit committee meetings, and the general response, of course, of the audit committee members was a little rap on the knuckles of the management to try and make the improvements. But now, this thing, or at least some part of it, as part of the key audit matters, will be out in the public. And this is basically what the issue is. And basically, this is what has to be looked at by the companies because it will no longer be now for internal consumption, but will be out in the public. Most of it was either buried in the audit files or as part of the management letter. But now, a great number of stakeholders, interested people would be able to read it. So basically, as you looked at the presentation, the audit report contains a number of changes that will be introduced. But I will concentrate on what is known as the key audit matter, or CAM, as they are actually called. So I'll just restrict my comments on that area. At the outset, let me clarify that the new audit report in any way does not bring in any insurmountable problems. It is not meant to add to corporate woes already burdened with an extensive set of disclosure. However, as in the case of any new regulation, there will be issues which will be pointed out by the auditors and that have to be taken care of. So I suppose what's in store for us? The first thing, of course, that companies, the board, and the management need to be aware of is the confidentiality. Now, companies jealously guard their privacy. Is the audit report about to trample on this hallowed principle? I'm not sure. But certainly, issues which are of confidential nature may be disclosed as part of the key audit matters. Some of the issues which the companies may not wish their competitors to become aware of could possibly form part of the audit matter. What if the auditors have reported a supply chain issue, or a plant integrity matter, or any close call on going concern basis? These are areas which will have to be looked at, and some of it could be competition-sensitive information. And companies may not necessarily wish that these should be made available to the public. So here is another area which will have impact on the issues that will be raised. The other is coarse perception. Just as possession is 9/10 of law, perception is 9/10 of reality. And just like the beauty, it lies in the eyes of the beholder. Now, how would an audit report be perceived by the public? Is a company which has got 10 key audit matters worse managed or not as well controlled as a company which has only got 2 audit matters? I mean, I'm sure you will all agree that it is not the number of CAM, as they are called, which is important, but their content. But unfortunately, practically, there is always a tendency that people look at numbers rather than looking at the contents. So there will always be a competition, especially in terms of industries in the similar area, why a particular company has 10 key audit matters and why the other one has 2. There would be, again, huge amount of discussions that will be required with the auditors because, as I said, irrespective of what those numbers contain, it is always the number that, that will be looked at to a large extent by other companies. Banks and mutual funds, which are repositories of public money, could be very sensitive to this information. Then what about board and audit committee relationship? Now, as you probably know, that audit committees comprise independent directors. They may not necessarily have the same view as that of the executive directors. So the auditors present their accounts to the audit committee and they discussed by the audit committee. If it is accepted by the audit committee, and along with all the key audit matters that have been raised by the auditors, and subsequently it is presented to the board, where there would be certain executive directors who may have a different view. Obviously, they know about the company far better than independent directors. Now, how do you resolve that? The audit committee has already agreed and recommended the account for approval. Generally, audit committees are held a day or maximum 2 days before the board meeting. Now, how do you resolve that? Do you discuss that again with the auditors? The auditors are not present at the board meeting. They are not required to be present at the board meeting. Do you call them? And even if you were to call them, would the reporting partner be in a position to change that without reference to their quality department or without reference to a discussion? I think probably unlikely. So this is the thing that will have to be looked at, and discussions with the auditors will have to be done, and finally the reports will have to be finalized. Otherwise, it may just be too late to actually issue the accounts as presented. So, I mean, these are some of the main points that I felt I would like to discuss. They're just practical aspect, nothing earth-shattering. What I've identified are just basically, that wasn't me. Are just pointers, certain critical issues. And they will have to be looked at and determined, and how to resolve them. It's not something which is new. Auditors have always pointed out, as I said earlier, issues that they have raised as part of the management letter. Whether the management letter goes to the board or to the management, but it remains within the confines of the company. The difference, of course, is now it will be out in the public and accessible to all of them. So, is there a solution? Well, unlike a good doctor, I can't prescribe a general prescription. Every company will have to plan and act the way that they feel is the best and in the interest of the company. They will have to ensure that they have a strategy to deal with this, that they would want to ensure that the matters that will be communicated have already been discussed, agreed, and only then released to the public. So, effectively, what that would mean is that the exposure to the audit committee, to external auditor, should take place a little earlier, rather than just on the day of the audit committee when the auditors are called in and they present the accounts, and generally after a few questions the accounts are recommended to the board for approval. That, I'm afraid, will not be the case. They will have to be discussed much earlier. So audit committee will have to be involved with the auditor far more than they have done now. The board should also have access to the accounts earlier, rather than the required 7 days as per the current law that provides, so that they can also assess what are those matters that have been included as part of key audit matters. And if there is any discussion that is required, that they can do it earlier rather than leave it right up to the end. So, of course, there has to be a planning process. Board audit committee meeting will have to be worked out on the basis of this requirement. The closing arrangement will also have to be worked out. So there's a host of activities that the company will have to do in order to just be geared up to effectively handle the changes that are coming up. So who said accountants are boring? There is never a dull moment in an accountant's life. Thank you.
Thank you, Firoza, for sharing the insights with us and for your advice that every audit committee should start interacting more and more with the auditors and find their own specific prescription. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time now for the well-awaited question and answer session. This will be conducted by Mr. Farooq Rahman. who is the chairman of the Auditing Standards Committee of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Pakistan. Farooq is a practicing chartered accountant and is one of my colleague partner in A. Ferguson and Company. Farooq, please take your seat.